The most powerful man in that room used to be a 13-year-old boy who cried in my classroom one afternoon after everyone else had gone home. He did not remember that. The day he stood in front of the cameras and called me a sad old man who needed to accept that the world had moved on without him. But I remembered. I have a box at home that remembers everything, and his name is on something inside it. He did not know me. That is the part that still sits strange in my chest. He looked right at me, in the very building where it happened, and he saw exactly what he wanted to see, which was a broke, grey, used-up old man clinging to a worthless old building and a worthless old idea. And he used me, in front of the news cameras, as a prop to prove a point about himself. He had no notion that the prop had once stayed late grading papers he could not yet write, or that the worthless old building was the only place on this earth he had ever been safe, or that the sad old man was the single reason there was a Royce Dalton standing there in a $1,000 coat at all. By the end of that afternoon, Royce Dalton was going to remember all of it, every bit. And he was going to remember it in front of the same cameras he had hoped would film my humiliation. This is the story of a man who built his whole life on the lie that he had done it alone, and the afternoon the truth walked back into the room and called him by his old name. My name is Calvin Pruitt. I am 55 years old, and for almost 30 years I taught middle school, 8th grade mostly, in a poor part of North St. Louis. The kind of neighborhood that shows up in the news only when something terrible happens in it, and never when something quietly good does, which is most days. I am not a rich man. I want to say that plainly at the start because it matters to what comes later. A teacher in a school like mine does not get rich, and I made it poorer on purpose, buying coats and books and bus passes and more than one hot meal out of a salary that was already a joke, for 30 years. And I do not regret $1 of it, but it means that at 55 I rent, and I drive a car with 200,000 miles on it. And to a man like Royce Dalton, I look like exactly what the world had told him a person who spends his life on other people's children ends up looking like. Which is a warning. I will tell you what that life cost. Since the Royce Daltons of the world are so certain they already know. It cost me money, but money was the cheap part. It cost me a marriage to a good woman who got tired, fairly, of a husband who had 30 children every September and came home each night with nothing left for the one household that was actually his. It cost me Saturdays and savings and my knees, and on the bad nights it cost me my certainty. Because here is the thing nobody warns you about a life spent on other people's children. You almost never find out whether it worked. They leave your room in June and walk off into their lives and the door shuts. And there is no report, no scoreboard, just the next 30 in September, and you begin again on pure faith. Faith that some of those afternoons landed, that somewhere a kid you can barely picture is standing up straight on account of an hour you have long since forgotten. Most of the time the faith is all you get. You hold the rope and the kid climbs up out of sight, and you never learn whether he reached the top or fell the moment he passed where you could see. A man can do that for 30 years and still lie awake at 55, wondering whether he spent the only life he had on a faith that never once paid out. That is the honest cost. And I want it on the table before I tell you how. On one corner, on one ordinary afternoon, the faith paid out all at once. After I retired from the classroom, I did not stop. I could not. It turns out, it is not a thing you can stop. I went to work running the after-school program at the Lindell Community Center, the old brick building on the corner that had been a school once, my school, the one where I started, and that the city had turned into a center for the neighborhood kids who needed somewhere to be that was not the street. That is where the boys and girls came who were where I had once been, and where Royce Dalton had once been. And it is the building Royce Dalton's company had bought and intended to knock down to put up something that would make him money, which is why he and I and the cameras were all standing in it on the afternoon this story turns on. Most people had one, a teacher, a coach, Some grown person from back when you were small and breakable, who decided, for no reason you had done a thing to earn, that you were worth not giving up on. If there was someone like that for you, the odds are good you have not said so to them in years, if ever. Keep them in mind while I tell you this. I'm going to circle back to them at the end, and to a thing I think you ought to do. There is a reason I keep a box, and a reason Royce Dalton's name is inside it. And you need it before any of the rest will land the way it should. When I started teaching, an old teacher who was retiring handed me the only piece of advice that ever proved completely true. She told me that I would spend my whole career being told to measure myself by test scores and graduation rates and all the things that fit on a form, and that the forms would always tell me I was failing. Because the forms do not measure the only thing that matters, which is the one kid, the single kid, in a class of 30, who is drowning so quietly that no one has noticed. And whether on the right afternoon, you happen to be the one who notices. She told me to keep, somewhere private, the proof of those afternoons. Because the forms would never give me any, and there would be years, she said, hard years, when the proof in that box would be the only thing standing between me and quitting. So I kept a box. For 30 years, every time a kid who was drowning broke the surface, the first essay a furious child ever wrote that was true, the note a girl left on my desk, the drawing, the test a kid passed that everyone, including the kid, had bet he would fail. I kept it. It is a banker's box, cardboard, soft at the corners now, and it is the most valuable thing I own. And Royce Dalton is in it, near the bottom. Because he was one of the early ones, I have opened that box maybe a dozen times in 30 years, no more, because it is not a thing you open lightly. It is a thing you keep for the night you need it, the way some men keep a bottle, and the better ones keep a letter. Most of what is in it would mean nothing to you. A spelling test, a drawing of a dog, a note in a child's hand that says only, "Thank you for not yelling," which is the whole heartbreaking summary of what some of those kids needed and were not getting anywhere else on earth. It is a strange inheritance to have built, a cardboard box of other people's turning points, worth nothing to anybody but me, and worth more to me than everything else I own put together. But the old teacher was right about it. There have been nights it was the only thing that kept me in the work. And near the bottom of it, all these years, was a page and a half I had been keeping without ever quite admitting to myself that I was holding it for the day I would get to hand it back. He came to me at 13, as about as angry a child as I have ever taught. And I have taught some angry ones. His father was a roomer. His mother was working herself to death and losing. And Royce had already learned the thing the neighborhood teaches its boys early, which is that needing anything is a weakness somebody will use to hurt you. So he had decided, at 13, to need nothing and no one. And he wore that decision like armor. And under the armor he was failing every class, and one bad afternoon from being gone for good, the way they go, into the things that were waiting for him out on that corner. Every teacher he had wanted him out of their room. He made sure of it. Being thrown out was easier than being seen, so I gave him work instead of detention. I made him keeper of the classroom library, a grand title for a boy whose actual job was to shelve 30 battered paperbacks. And I did it because it gave him a reason to be in my room that he did not have to admit he wanted. A boy who has decided he is worthless cannot be argued into worth. He can only be handed small responsibilities and allowed to find out, slowly, that he did not drop them. I gave him a key to the supply closet, which was nothing, a closet of pencils, and was everything, because no adult had ever once trusted Royce Dalton with a key to anything. I learned when his birthday was and made no fuss of it. Only happened to have an extra sandwich that day that I could not possibly finish, which he ate without either of us naming what it was. None of it was on any lesson plan. None of it would have shown up on a single form the district used to decide whether I was any good at my job. It was just the slow, unglamorous, nearly invisible work of becoming, to one terrified boy, a thing he could finally afford to trust. One closet key and one spare sandwich at a time. I did not throw him out. I want to be careful how I say this, because it sounds like more than it was. I did not do anything heroic. I just declined, day after day, to give him the fight he was picking. And I kept him after class on a pretext. And I gave him jobs to do that let him stay in a warm, safe room without having to admit he wanted to. And I waited, the way you wait. Because a boy who has decided to need nothing cannot be talked out of it. He can only be slowly, patiently shown that this one room, at least, is not going to hurt him for needing it. It took most of a year. And one afternoon in the spring, on an assignment he had blown off a dozen times, the assignment to write one true thing about yourself, Royce Dalton sat in my empty classroom after the bell, and instead of the usual nothing, he wrote. He wrote a page and a half about being so tired of being angry that some nights he did not care if he woke up, and about how the only hour of his week he felt like a person was the hour in my room. And he handed it to me, without looking at me, the way you hand someone a wound. And then he put his head down on the desk, and he cried. A 13-year-old boy who had decided at the age of 13 to never let anybody see him do exactly that. I kept that page. I never told him I kept it. I told him it was good writing, which was true. And I told him I expected a great deal of him, which was also true. And I never let him see that his page and a half had rearranged something in me. Because a boy like that cannot carry the weight of a grown man's feelings on top of his own. And because, and this is the part the forms will never understand, the work is not about you. You do the thing, and you let the kid believe he did it himself, because he is going to need that belief, that he is the kind of person who can climb out of a hole, far more than he is ever going to need to know that somebody reached down. So I gave Royce Dalton the belief that he had pulled himself up. I just did not tell him I was the rope. He climbed, Lord. Did he climb? He turned it around that year and the next, and he got out, and he got educated, and he got rich. The kind of rich that builds towers and buys community centers to knock them down. And somewhere in all that climbing, he took the belief I had given him, the one that was supposed to be a gift, and he turned it into a wall. Because the story Royce Dalton told the world, the story he had built his entire brand on, the speeches, the interviews, the slogan on his own company's website, was that he had done it all alone. No handouts, no help, no one. Pulled himself up from nothing by nothing but his own two hands. And the terrible thing, the thing I understood only that afternoon at the center, is that he had to believe it. Because the alternative, that he had been a terrified, drowning boy who was saved by one tired teacher who refused to let go, was the one thing his whole armored, self-made self could not survive knowing. So he had buried me, not forgotten. Buried, which is a thing you do on purpose, deep, and build a tower on top of so it can never get out. And then his company bought the Lindell Community Center. I do not think he knew what it was when he bought it. It was a parcel, a line on a spreadsheet, a brick building on a corner in a neighborhood his algorithms told him was ready to turn. By the time he found out, if he ever fully did, the deal was done and the cameras were called. Because Royce Dalton did not knock down a building quietly, he made it a media event, a triumphant man of vision revitalizes blighted neighborhood event. And he came down to the corner himself in his good coat to stand in front of the thing he was about to destroy and be filmed being important in front of it. You have to understand what Royce Dalton had become to understand why he came down to the corner himself. He was not only a developer by then, he was a kind of local prophet of the bootstrap, a man who gave speeches, who ran a foundation with his own face on it, who was rumored to be measuring an office with his name on a ballot, and the whole engine of it, the speeches and the foundation and the brand, ran on one story. The one printed on the wall of his company lobby, the one he told every reporter who would sit still. I came from nothing. Nobody helped me. I did it alone. It is a powerful story in this country, maybe the most powerful one we have, and people loved him for it. And they loved him for it precisely because it let everyone comfortable off the hook. Because if Royce Dalton hauled himself up off this exact corner with no help at all, then nobody owed anybody anything. And those kids in the center did not need a safe room. They just needed to want it more. That was the gospel he preached that day. And tearing down the Lindell Community Center was not a side effect of the gospel. It was the sermon. He was going to level the safe room to prove that safe rooms make children soft, on the very corner where a safe room had once kept him alive. And he did not remember, because he had paid a great deal over 30 years to be very sure he never would. I was there because I had been fighting the demolition for months. The only way a man like me can fight, with petitions and pleading and showing up. Because that building was the last safe, warm room for 100 kids who had nowhere else. Kids exactly like the one Royce used to be, including a 13-year-old I had my eye on that year named Darius, who was angry in the exact way Royce had been angry, and who was one bad afternoon from the corner, and for whom that center was the only thing standing in the gap. I saw Royce in Darius the way you see weather coming. The same locked jaw, the same decision made far too young to need nothing from anybody. The same brutal arithmetic running behind the eyes. The one that has already concluded that wanting things is how you get hurt. So the safest play is to want nothing and dare the world to take it. Darius had a little sister he walked to school, and a mother doing her best on far too little, and a father who was, like Royce's, a rumor. And he had begun the slow drift toward the corner that has swallowed more boys than I can think about without my chest going tight. The center was the one warm, safe hour in his week, the one room where he got to be 13 instead of a soldier. And Royce Dalton's spreadsheet had it marked for demolition in the spring. I had not let myself say the whole of that irony out loud, that the man tearing the gap open over this boy was himself a boy a safe room had once saved. Because some symmetries are too cruel to look at straight and keep walking. But I felt it on that corner. I felt 30 years bending back on themselves like a road you did not know was a circle. I had not made the connection out loud, even to myself, that the man knocking it down was a boy I had once kept from that same corner. I think I had not let myself, because some ironies are too cruel to look at straight until they are standing in front of you in a good coat. He saw me in the small crowd of neighborhood people who had come to protest, and he did what a certain kind of powerful man does with a protest, which is to absorb it into his show. He came over, cameras following, and he engaged me, the sad old man with the petition, because nothing makes a powerful man look more reasonable on the news than being gracious to the pathetic opposition. He asked me, for the cameras, what my objection was, and I told him, plainly, that the building saved children, that I had watched it save them for 30 years, that I was watching it save one right now, and that you do not knock down the one safe room in a neighborhood and call it revitalization. And Royce Dalton smiled the smile I have seen on exactly one other face, his own, at 13, the armored smile. And he turned to the cameras and he made me his prop. He said that this was the problem with neighborhoods like this one, this exact mindset, this learned helplessness, this idea that kids need to be saved by some program, some building, some handout. He said he was living proof of the opposite. He said he had grown up right here, worse off than any kid in that center, and that nobody had saved him. No teacher, no program, no safe room. That he had pulled himself up alone by refusing to be a victim. and that the kindest thing you could do for these children was tear down the crutch and let them learn to stand the way he had. And then he looked at me, grey and poor and clinging to my petition, and he told me, gently, for the cameras, that he understood it was hard for my generation, but that the world had moved on, and that maybe it was time for me to accept that my way had failed and step aside for people who actually got results. I want to be honest about what rose up in me then, because you should not walk away from this picturing some gentle, bloodless old man who felt no anger. I had the truth in my hand. I could have ended Royce Dalton in front of every camera on that corner with about 3 sentences. Could have told the whole watching city that the self-made man's entire myth was a lie. That I had the proof at home. That the great Royce Dalton had once cried in my classroom and written a page about not wanting to wake up. And I wanted to. For one hot second, I wanted to take his myth and break it over my knee in front of everyone, the way he was breaking 30 years of my work in front of everyone. The angry old man in me wanted it badly. I did not do it, and the reason is the whole of who I had tried to be for 30 years in that building. You do not save a child by humiliating him, and Royce Dalton, standing there in his armor, in his good coat, was still, underneath all of it, the same drowning 13-year-old. And the drowning ones lash out hardest exactly when they are most afraid of being seen. And the cruelty he was aiming at me was not really about me at all. It was the panic of a man who had built a tower on a buried thing and could feel, somehow, the ground beginning to move. Breaking his myth in front of the cameras would have won me the afternoon and lost me the boy. And I have never once in my life chosen the afternoon over the boy. So I did not expose him. I did something quieter and much harder and much worse for him. Because it came not as an attack, but as a rescue, which is the one thing his armor had no defense against. I waited until the cameras drifted, and the crowd thinned, and the show wound down. And Royce was turning to go, satisfied, the sad old man handled. And I said one thing to his back, not loud, just loud enough. I said the first true thing about yourself. I said it the way I had said it to a 13-year-old in an empty classroom 30 years before, because it was the assignment, the exact words of the assignment. Write one true thing about yourself. And they were words that existed nowhere in the world except in that room, and in my box, and in the buried memory of one man. And I watched them hit Royce Dalton in the back, like a hand on the shoulder he had spent 30 years making sure no one could ever put there. He stopped. He did not turn around right away. And when he did, the face that turned around was not the developer's face, and it was not the armored boy's face. It was the face underneath both, the one I had seen exactly once, on an afternoon in the spring, over a page and a half, and he looked at me, really looked, for the first time. And I watched 30 years of buried ground come up all at once. And he said, in a voice that did not belong to a powerful man at all, "Mr. Pruitt, I had brought the page. I want you to know I had not planned to use it as a weapon. I had brought it because some part of me had known, walking into that building, that this might be the day. And I took it out of my coat, the page and a half, yellowed now, soft at the folds from 30 years in a box. His own 13-year-old handwriting. And I did not wave it at the cameras, and I did not read it aloud to the crowd. I just held it out to him alone, and I let him take it and recognize his own hand. And I watched the most powerful man in North St. Louis stand on a corner and read a thing he wrote at 13 about not wanting to wake up, and about how the only hour he felt like a person was the hour in my room, the room he was 30 feet from tearing down. He did not say much. There was not much that could be said. I will tell you the one thing I said to him, because it is the only thing I came there to say. And it was not an accusation. It was the opposite. I told him I had kept it for 30 years, not as proof against him, but as proof of him. that he was the thing in my box I was proudest of on my hardest days, and that the boy who wrote that page had not pulled himself up alone. No, but that he had pulled himself up. That the climbing was real and was his. That all I had ever done was refuse to let go of the rope while he did the climbing. And that there was no shame in having been held. That the shame was only ever in pretending you had not been. And then turning around and kicking the rope away from the next drowning kid behind you. And I told him that boy, the one who wrote the page, was still in there. And that I had never stopped being proud of him, not for one day, not even today, and that I was too old to stop now. He came apart then, right there on the corner, the way I had watched him come apart exactly once before over a page and a half. A grown and powerful man in a good coat, with 30 years of buried ground coming up through him all at once. And the few people still around did the decent thing and looked away. Because there are things a man should not have to do in front of a crowd. I did not say anything more. There was nothing more that needed saying. I had not come to that corner to win, and watching him, I understood that I had not won anything. Because this had never been a fight. It had only looked like one from the outside. A teacher does not win against a student. There is no such thing. The best afternoon of my whole long career was not the one where I beat Royce Dalton in front of the cameras. It was the one where I got him back. The boy who wrote the page returned to me on the same corner where I had lost him to the tower, 30 years late, and not 1 minute too late. That was the cold I served Royce Dalton, not the humiliation he had earned, the mercy he could not survive. Because you can armor a man against an attack, but there is no armor in the world against being forgiven by the person you wronged, and being told, by the one who knew the worst and weakest truth about you, that he had been proud of you the whole time. It took Royce Dalton apart more completely than any exposure could have, and it took him apart in the one direction that mattered, which was inward, toward the boy he had buried, instead of outward, toward me. I understood him, by then, in a way I had not before, and it took the last of the anger out of me. His cruelty had never been strength. It was the oldest fear there is, the fear of being known, of someone seeing the drowning boy under the tower. And he had attacked me on that corner for the same reason a cornered animal attacks. Because I was the one person alive who could see him, and being seen was the thing he had spent 30 years and a fortune making sure could never happen again. The myth of the self-made man is not a brag. It is a wound. It is what a person builds when the truth that they were saved, that they needed somebody, that they were once small and afraid and held, has become unbearable to them. And I have come to believe there are a great many powerful, lonely men walking around inside that exact wound, kicking away ropes, because no one ever told them there was no shame in having been pulled up. The Lindell Community Center is still standing. I will not pretend the reasons were all noble or that they all happened that afternoon. Because change in a grown man is slower and less tidy than a story wants it to be. But Royce Dalton did not knock it down. His company found another parcel, and then, quietly, with none of the cameras he loved, he did something else, which was to fund that center, fully, for as long as it stands, a building he now makes sure will never want for a coat, or a book, or a bus pass, or a hot meal again. And there is a small office in it where he comes some afternoons, no entourage, and sits with the angry boys nobody else will sit with, and does for them, clumsily, learning as he goes, the thing that was once done for him. He has not made a brand of it. That is how I know it is real. The loud part of Royce Dalton built towers. The quiet part of him, the boy who wrote the page, came back to the corner. And that is the part of this I did not save and could not have. The part he had to do himself, which is the only part that was ever really his. I see him at the center sometimes, on those afternoons, It is a strange thing to watch. A man who built towers learning, at almost 50, how to sit on the floor with an angry kid and lose at a board game on purpose so the kid will play one more. How to ask a question and then do the hard part, which is to wait for the answer instead of filling the quiet with himself. He is not good at it yet. The quiet work is harder than the loud work, and he spent 40 years building strength in all the wrong muscles. But he shows up, which is the whole of it. He shows up on a Tuesday when no one is filming and no one will ever know, and he sits with a boy nobody else will sit with. We do not talk much, he and I, about that afternoon on the corner. We do not need to. He tried to give the page back to me once, and I told him to keep it, that it had waited in my box 30 years to be returned to its rightful owner. And the owner was him. He keeps it in his desk now, he told me. The loud man's desk up in the glass tower. The one true thing he ever wrote, where he can see it on the days the old armor starts trying to climb back on. Darius, the 13-year-old I had my eye on, the one who was angry in the exact way Royce had been angry, did not go to the corner. He goes to the center, which is still there, and he has a man named Royce who sits with him some afternoons and does not pretend he climbed out of anything alone, and tells him the truth instead, which is the better gift. And I have a new page in my box. Darius wrote it. It is about his little sister, and it is true, and it is good writing, and it is, on my hard days, the proof the old teacher promised me would be the only thing standing between me and quitting. She was right about that, the way she was right about all of it. So here is what I am going to ask of you. There is, somewhere in your life, a person who held the rope while you climbed, and you have very probably told yourself, the way Royce told himself, the way we all like to tell ourselves, that you did it on your own. You did the climbing. That part is yours, and no one can take it. But you did not hold your own rope. Nobody does. And that person is very likely still alive, and would very likely give anything to know that the hour you spent in their room, or their kitchen, or their passenger seat, mattered, that it was the rope, that it held. So before you do anything else today, you go find them, and you tell them. Do not wait 30 years and a box and a corner full of cameras to say the thing. Tell me about your rope holder in the comments. By name, if you can. I read every one of them. And if you are a person who has spent a quiet life holding ropes for other people's children and wondering, on the hard nights, whether any of it ever mattered, I am here to tell you, from one tired old teacher to whoever you are, that it did, that it does, that somewhere a tower is standing on the rope you held, and the man on top of it is going to remember you yet.